Specter Knight's New Game Plus mode is the best mode in Shovel Knight, and here's why. Yeah, the algorithm seems to like my Shovel Knight content, so here's another one. Let's go. I love Specter Knight's New Game Plus mode. In fact, it's probably my favorite way to play the game. Shovel and Plague Knight do exactly what you would expect from most New Game Plus modes. Enemies do more damage, you get less checkpoints and healing items, yada yada yada. They amp up the difficulty a bit, but not in any particularly interesting ways. Specty does something a little different. They took arguably the easiest campaign in the game, and they changed it up to be the most challenging mode yet. So to answer why Specter Knight is the best one, first we have to know what is actually different about it. Part 1. So you beat Specter Knight's campaign. Congratulations. But hey, maybe you just want to play some more? Well, good news for you, Specter of Torment, New Game Plus. Now with combined health and magic meters. Thought Specty was just a little too easy? Well, now your health is constantly draining, and you'll slowly die no matter what you do. Every moment is agony, and you'll feel weaker with every passing second. Just like in real life. But you can refill your life meter by murdering everything in your path, just like in real life. Part 2. Remember all those tricky little curios? Well, now they cost health. Yeah, enjoy that. Every time you use an item, you take one big step closer to the sweet embrace of death. Or undeath. Specter Knight's kind of already dead. I'm not sure what happens when he dies. His clothes go away. And last but not least, part 3. Remember that fun little skull you could grab and suck out all the green gummy goo and heal yourself? Well, take that will skull and throw it out the damn window, because it's gone. If you want to heal, your only choice is murder. So have fun in Specter Knight New Game Plus. It's objectively the hardest game I've ever played. That's a lie. That's not true at all. One of the reasons I was never all that thrilled with Shovel Knight's New Game Plus mode is that the increased difficulty doesn't really change how strong the phase locket is. It's like, oh no, enemies do more damage, phase locket. Oh no, a bunch of spikes, phase locket. Oh, it's a boss, phase locket. Use it, dum-dum. I mean, seriously. I know I'm rehashing my Shovel Knight items video here, and I might end up doing that a little bit more before the video's done. But seriously, this is why the phase locket is so powerful, because it's applicable in practically every situation in the game. It's no risk, high reward. And New Game Plus doesn't change that. The Will Skull was the exact same way. Sure, I could use the barrier lantern to block these projectiles, but why would I? I have the Will Skull, so if I take a hit here, I'll just heal up right after. No need to pause and change items, just tank the damn hit and move on. But you can't do that in New Game Plus Specter Knight because no Will Skull. When you've got one super useful item that can be used in practically any scenario, that's a problem. Specter Knight New Game Plus attempts to solve this problem by removing that one problematic item, and then by attaching a lot of risk to every single item in the game. Even if an item is really powerful, you can't just spam it anymore because it costs health. But now that the campaign is much harder, they've effectively increased the potential reward you can get for using an item well. Risk and reward. You know, this is giving me deja vu. Oh yeah, that's right, this is exactly what I said I wanted in my last video. More items with this sort of risk-reward design. They straight up removed the one item in Specter Knight's campaign that had unbalanced risk and reward, and they increased both the risk and reward for every other item in the game, all by simply combining your health and magic into one meter. This is genius, wonderful, elegant game design, and I love it. You start looking for ways to use the items to beat the level design. Since every level can be beaten without items, I tended to not do this the first time I played the original campaign. In the regular campaign, again, sure, I could use such and such item to skip this thing, but then I'll miss out on treasure, or I just don't need it and I can do without it. But now, with a ticking clock, I'm much more motivated to look for creative ways to use items. Now, to be fair, a lot of this does amount to using the Judgment Rush in cool ways just to skip as much as possible, but it's always a trade-off. It creates this really engaging process of thinking about the scenario I'm being presented with. Scenarios in Shovel Knight often boiled down to, is there an enemy in front of me? Use the phase locket to kill him without taking damage. Are there spikes ahead of me? Use the just use the phase locket, man. It's the best item in the game, dude. But in Specter Knight New Game Plus, there's way more questions to be asked now. Can I take down this knight without getting hit, or is it worth it to kill him the safe way with the Dread Talon? Should I use the Shadow Mirror to break these blocks without getting bounced back, or should I risk it and not trade the health? Sometimes you pick right. You beat that enemy without taking a single hit and without using up your health on an item. Boom, awesome, feels great. And sometimes on the far other end of the spectrum, you fail. You sacrifice some health using an item and you still end up getting hit. But it was your fault. You screwed up, and that's fun too. Because in the normal campaign, if you do something wrong, there's always one answer. I should have just used a curio. Usually either the will skull or the hover plume. Oh, whoops, I fell in the pit because I happened to forget to put on the hover plume before I'd made that jump. I'll just make sure to equip it next time. That's not really an interesting decision. You know what is an interesting decision? Hey, that bird boss killed the shit out of me. Maybe I should use the skeleton sentry to slow it down, or the Chronos coin, or time a dread talon well to do a bunch of damage. The will skull isn't an interesting choice. In the regular campaign, you can just do everything recklessly without items, take as many hits as you want, and then it doesn't matter because you can just heal up with the will skull. Every item was either so weak that there was no point in using it, or they were so situational that you just kind of forgot about them and never used them. I think what this really comes down to is a phrase I've already said, having interesting choices to make. Because when you have more viable options, you get to make more interesting choices. This is the hallmark of a well-balanced system, where there's lots of different viable options. There's no interesting choices in all of Shovel Knight. You use the phase locket, and you don't fall into pits. Those are the only choices. Use the will skull or the hover plume. Those are your choices in Specter Knight. But Specter Knight New Game Plus, every encounter has an interesting choice to make, because the increased difficulty and the new risk attached to each item forces you to make choices and to think about options you might never have considered before. Here I am using the throwing sickle. I never ever used this thing in the normal campaign, but here in New Game Plus, well, anything's possible. Except the bounding soul, that thing is still pretty garbage. Unfortunately, this all doesn't do anything to solve what might honestly be an even bigger issue in Specter of Torment than the will skull. Slight tangent here, this is definitely something I should have talked about in my last video. And yeah, I know, I said that last time too, but look, my videos are not perfect, and I never claim to speak with any sort of authority. So of course I can forget things, or leave things out, or just find out about stuff that I really should have known about before. That's just the way things are. I'm not Joseph Anderson or H-Bomber guy. I don't have the time to make a feature-length analysis of items, so my opinions are still kind of changeable, and my views in a previous video might not be exactly how I see things now. I haven't and probably never will make a comprehensive analysis featuring all of my opinions. If I keep making in-depth videos on a single game, there's probably gonna be some opinions that change as I get new information. I don't know everything, so if there's something you think I haven't considered or might just not know, please, seriously, tell me in the comments. Anyway, tangent over. The item I should have talked about in the items video is the skeletal sentry. This fucking thing it's ridiculous. And no, the don't like it, don't use it response, when you say that, you could not be missing the point any harder. I can't believe I haven't said this word in a video before, but my complaint is that these items are unbalanced. A good combat system, or item system, whatever you want to call it, in a video game should have good balance. When you're playing Dead Space and they give you this dinky little pistol as your starting weapon, and you find out later that the game can be easily beaten on the hardest difficulty using only that weapon because it turns out the first one they give you is the best one in the game, that's bad balance. If you have a variety of options in a game, there should be a niche for each of those options to fill. If one item is so broadly applicable that it just fills every niche, that item is overpowered. And if you give me something in your game that appears for all intents and purposes to be an integral part of the intended experience of playing your game, I am going to use it. Keep that term in mind, intended experience, because we'll be coming back to that for sure. The Metal Blade in Mega Man 2, stuff like that. If you give players a cheap, powerful resource, they are going to use it, and to leave that in the game as is just straight up bad balance. And now, I thought that Specter Knight's New Game Plus mode would fix this balance issue because playing through the normal campaign the first time, I thought the Will Skull was the most unbalanced thing. No, I was wrong. This little bastard is the most broken piece of shit in this whole damn game. Watch this. There goes your health, sorry bud. This works against practically every normal level boss. Specter Knight's bosses, even on New Game Plus, don't get hard until the end game, when you start fighting bosses who don't just sit in the middle of the arena the whole time. The only reason the Enchantress is the hardest boss in Specter of Torment is because the skeleton can't reach her. Otherwise, she would be just as easy as the rest of them. This is what I'm talking about. Yes, you can beat the bosses without Mr. Skelly over here, and yes, he is completely optional. You don't have to use him ever. But that doesn't change the fact that this item is unbalanced. It's not about whether or not I chose to use it. It's not about the fact that the phase locket is optional. That's not the point. The point is it's bad balance, and this is my biggest complaint. No, honestly, my only complaint with Shovel Knight as a whole, and even my favorite, most challenging mode in the game is not free from this curse. That said, it does get a lot better towards the end of the game. The Black Knight and the Enchantress are by far the hardest bosses in the game, in no small part because Mr. Skittles is more or less useless against them. These two fights are some of the first times I had to use some creative strategies against bosses that I had never used before. One of the cool things about Specter Knight New Game Plus is that you can still use items when you're one hit from death. A single hit will kill you, and the Hover Plume, Chronos Coin, and Judgment Rush are disabled at this health, but you're free to spam the rest of the items as much as you want. One of my strategies that very nearly worked was avoiding Black Knight as much as possible while spamming the Bounding Soul. Hey, I did find a use for it. I tried a bunch of strategies against him using pretty much every item in my arsenal, but the one that eventually won the day was using the Barrier Lantern, charging it up on his projectile attacks and then shooting it at him from a distance. I tried to not get him off his turtle because while that's the easiest way to kill him with most other strategies, my Barrier Lantern strategy was a lot safer when he was in the air. I also like that the turtle here basically exists in this fight just to make sure you can't spam the Skeletal Sentry in this phase. This is the kind of play that Specter Knight New Game Plus encourages better than any other game mode in Shovel Knight. Playing this fight on normal, I was able to beat it easily by recklessly attacking and then just healing up with the Will Skull. It worked, but it wasn't a particularly interesting way to win. New Game Plus forced me to think outside the box and use an item I had hardly used anywhere else in the game. The Enchantress fight is awesome for the same reason. Brook from One Piece is practically useless in this fight, so I used the Spider Scythe, another item that I didn't get much use out of in the rest of the game, to essentially put a big spinning trap in the middle of the arena for her to dash into. Again, on the normal campaign, I beat her very easily with just basic attacks and the Will Skull. Boring strats like that don't fly here in New Game Plus. Experimentation, adaptation, this is what a well-balanced system can encourage, and this is why Specter Knight New Game Plus is the absolute best mode in Shovel Knight, because it's the most balanced. Intended experience. Let's talk about that phrase. We're diverging a little bit from Specter Knight here into more general item talk, but hear me out. I got a ton of comments on the last video, and I seriously appreciate every single one of them, especially this guy. And some of them, as you would expect, disagreed with me. Fine, that's okay. I'm always interested to see dissenting opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. But what struck me is that nobody disputed how strong the phase locket is, just whether or not it's a problem that I'm allowed to complain about. This, again, is a point on which I could have gone into more detail. I don't hate the concept of items as a difficulty setting, but there's a few issues with that. One, if that was the intent with items, and I'm not convinced that it was, then that sort of thing needs to be made clear to all players. See Mark Brown's fantastic video on game assist modes and accessibility for more on this subject. I won't retread his entire video here, but the gist of it is, if you want to make a difficulty setting that deviates from a game's intended experience, then that has to be made crystal clear to the player. Once again, I'm not convinced that Shovel Knight's items were specifically designed with this intention, because I'm pretty sure playing with items is the intended experience. But if we assume that they were just put in there to help players who need a boost, then that purpose is not communicated. A somewhat skilled player like myself is basically playing easy mode by default, and you don't even know that items are optional. If items are supposed to help less skilled players, that's okay, I guess, but you should clue your players into that sort of thing. But all of that is practically moot, because honestly, when I really think about it now, I don't think items were intended to be boosts for struggling players. I think they were a part of the intended experience, in which case the phase locket is still kind of poor design because of how strong it is compared to everything else. The Will Skull in Specter Knight Original is like this, and the Skeletal Sentry, at least in terms of fighting bosses, is definitely way overpowered. When they made the game, they intended for the base experience of playing the game to include these overpowered items. And no, again, don't like it, don't use it is not a valid response to that. It is in the game, therefore it can be criticized. I'm frankly disappointed that this even needs to be said, but what I said in the original video was clearly not clear enough. When you say, if you don't like it, don't use it, what you're essentially saying is that because these items are optional, you're not allowed to criticize them. And that's just ridiculous. That's a phrase I wish I had thought of when I made that first video, is that optional doesn't mean immune to criticism. That's just to say that because items are optional, that they are immune to any sort of critique, that's ridiculous. And if you still think that I'm just not allowed to talk about or criticize optional things in a video game, well, I just don't know what to say to you anymore. Go ahead and hit me with that dislike, I guess, because I don't know how else to convince you that really nothing is immune to criticism. There's a great quote in that Game Maker's Toolkit video that Mark Brown basically stole from the developer of Heat Signature. You're giving players options if they need them, but you're not asking them to design how the game should work. Ideally, that's what accessibility settings and difficulty settings should accomplish. They should provide accessibility without compromising the intended experience. If items in Shovel Knight are intended as a difficulty supplement, then that is not properly communicated, and a player like me is basically playing easy mode until I decide to put house rules on myself to not use items. Plus, if I do that because I want a more challenging experience, well, now I'm missing out on a large chunk of the game's content, because using it will just make the game too easy. That's not good. And if they're a part of the intended experience and not a difficulty setting, then, well, they're just poorly balanced. Neither option is good, but neither option makes Shovel Knight a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, back to Specter Knight. I think the changes made to the player's resources and items does a really good job of encouraging creative item use without compromising the game's difficulty. Sadly though, one of Specter Knight's biggest issues isn't completely solved by this mode. The Skeletal Sentry will still demolish practically every boss for you, but the last two real bosses, this guy barely counts, are a joy to fight because their design forces you to adapt your strategies, and the levels themselves are a lot more engaging with the ticking clock of your ever-draining health bar. The risk-reward design I longed for in the normal campaigns is delivered much better with Specter Knight New Game Plus, and items outside of boss fights are a lot more balanced in general thanks to this. If Specter Knight New Game Plus turned you off with its weird combined bars and draining health, I really encourage you to give it another try. Find creative ways to use items to beat the level design, go fast, experiment, adapt, and above all else, get good, scrub. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I am going to be moving soon, so if content is a little short in the coming weeks, that's probably why. But I'll be back to regular videos before you know it. Anyway, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.